There are moments in history when the world seems to pause, when uncertainty hangs heavy in the air, and people ask the same question in 1,000 different ways: what comes next? As we approach and move beyond November 27, 2025, many believers feel an urgency deep in their spirit, a stirring that something is shifting globally, spiritually, and personally. But the real question is not simply what will happen in the world, but what will happen to Christians. Because throughout history, every time the world entered a season of shaking, God's people entered a season of shaping. When nations trembled, the church often grew stronger. When fear rose, faith was refined. So today we explore what may unfold for believers, not through sensational predictions or fear-driven speculation, but through timeless biblical patterns, spiritual truth, and the undeniable way God works in His people during times of transition. This is not a message of panic. It is a message of preparation, not a message of defeat, but of destiny. Because whatever comes after November 27th, 2025, one thing remains certain: God is not finished with His people. When we talk about what may happen after a pivotal moment like November 27th, 2025, many people immediately look outward. They analyze news headlines, political movements, global instability, economic forecasts. But if history and Scripture teach us anything, it's that the most significant changes rarely begin in the world around us. They begin in the hearts of people. And for Christians, this next season may not first manifest as external crisis, but as internal clarity. There comes a time when belief can no longer remain theoretical, when faith that once felt comfortable, cultural, or inherited suddenly demands personal ownership. For years, many believers have been able to stand quietly in the middle, faithful enough to feel connected, yet close enough to the world to avoid tension. But seasons of transition have a way of dissolving the middle ground, not through persecution alone, but through purpose. Psychologists call this moment a crystallization of identity, where external pressures force a person to choose what truly defines them. Philosophers describe it as a disclosure of being, where the deeper self emerges when comfort is stripped away. Spiritually, we might call it refinement. God uses shaking not to expose weakness as failure, but to reveal strength that was unnoticed. Think about it. Diamonds are not formed in quiet environments. They emerge under pressure. Steel is not strengthened in stillness. It is forged in fire. And faith, the kind that endures, rarely develops in seasons of ease. So what will happen to Christians? Many will discover that casual belief no longer sustains them. The faith that once rested on routine, Sunday attendance, occasional prayer, sporadic devotion, will feel insufficient. Not because God becomes distant, but because He is calling His people into maturity. This separation is not primarily between Christians and non-Christians. It's between conviction and convenience, between those who follow Christ because it's familiar and those who follow Him because it's true. And that distinction will become visible, not through labels, not through arguments, not through social media declarations, but through character, through resilience, through an unexplainable peace when others panic. People around you will begin to notice. They may not understand it, but they will sense something different. When fear rises, those rooted in faith will stand calm. When confusion spreads, those grounded in truth will speak with clarity. When the world becomes more self-protective, believers will become more self-giving. That contrast will draw a line, not one we draw in arrogance, but one that becomes evident through transformation. This is not meant to intimidate anyone. It is meant to awaken, because deep down, every Christian longs for a faith that is alive, meaningful, and impactful. No one truly desires a lukewarm spiritual existence, but comfort often lulls us into passivity. It convinces us that tomorrow will always look like today, and preparation can always wait. Yet, seasons of separation disrupt that illusion. They remind us that belief is not merely a statement, it is a way of life, The world may become more demanding, but the church may become more authentic. The pressures ahead will not destroy genuine faith, they will reveal it. And here is the encouraging part. Those who feel weak right now, those who feel uncertain or unprepared, are often the very ones God strengthens first. Awareness of weakness is the starting point of transformation. So instead of asking, what will the world do to us? Perhaps the better question is, what will God develop in us? Because when faith becomes visible, it becomes powerful. And the separation that many fear may actually be the very process that prepares believers for their greatest impact. The world may shake, but true faith will stand. As we move deeper into this conversation about what may unfold after November 27, 2025, we have to recognize something remarkable that often happens in times of uncertainty. When the familiar structures of life begin to shake, when people can no longer rely on routines, institutions, or assumptions, something awakens within the human spirit. History repeatedly shows that seasons of instability are also seasons of spiritual discovery. When the world becomes louder, the soul begins to listen more carefully. Sociologists refer to this phenomenon as meaning-seeking behavior. When external security weakens, individuals instinctively search for deeper anchors. Psychologists describe it as a quest for coherence, a drive within every human being to unite their experiences into a narrative that makes sense. Philosophers have long argued that crises reveal the limitations of materialism and force people to confront ultimate questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What truly matters? Spiritually, we often call this awakening. For years, many individuals have drifted through life on autopilot. Faith was a background concept, something acknowledged but rarely explored. Truth was treated as optional, personal, or flexible. But when circumstances shift and the foundations people once trusted begin to feel unstable, the hunger for something solid intensifies. We've seen this pattern throughout history. During times of war, economic collapse, cultural upheaval, or moral confusion, spiritual movements have emerged with surprising strength. Not because people suddenly became religious, but because their inner longing for meaning could no longer be satisfied by temporary solutions. Entertainment loses its appeal. Material success feels hollow. Distractions that once numbed the mind become insufficient. And that is where many Christians, and even those who have never considered faith seriously, may find themselves after this moment in time. The questions that once seemed distant will become personal. The desire for truth will grow stronger than the desire for comfort. This awakening will not always look dramatic. It may begin quietly. Someone who hasn't prayed in years suddenly feels compelled to speak to God. A person who walked away from church finds themselves searching for sermons late at night. Families who once prioritized everything else begin longing for spiritual grounding. Conversations that once revolved around trivial matters begin touching on purpose, hope, and eternity. It's important to understand this hunger is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of honesty. People are realizing that information alone cannot satisfy them. We are surrounded by endless voices, news, social media, opinions, analysis, yet many feel emptier than ever. Knowledge without foundation leads to confusion, not clarity. What the soul longs for is not just data, but direction. Not just explanation, but truth. And Christians have a profound opportunity in this season, not to argue louder, but to live deeper, not to preach condemnation, but to offer hope. When spiritual hunger rises, people are not looking for perfect people, they are looking for authentic people, those whose lives reflect peace in uncertainty, conviction without hostility, love without compromise. This awakening may reshape the church. It may move believers away from performance-based religion and toward genuine relationship with God. It may revive prayer, worship, and community, not as rituals, but as lifelines. It may remind us that faith is not merely an accessory to life, it is the foundation of life. And here's the powerful truth. Spiritual hunger is not something we must manufacture. It is already being stirred. The question is whether we will respond to it, whether we will nurture it in ourselves and in others, whether we will recognize this season not as a threat, but as an invitation, because when the world becomes uncertain, the human heart becomes open, and that openness may become the doorway through which countless lives are transformed. The search for truth is rising. Let's not ignore it. As we continue this journey of understanding what may unfold after November 27, 2025, we must acknowledge a reality that many would prefer to avoid. Seasons of awakening are often followed by seasons of testing. When faith becomes more visible, it also becomes more vulnerable to resistance. Not necessarily in the form of sweeping persecution or dramatic opposition, but through subtle pressures, social tension, and internal struggles that challenge the depth of our convictions. History teaches us that whenever people rediscover purpose, that purpose is immediately confronted. Psychologists call this developmental stress, the pressure that accompanies growth. Muscles strengthen through resistance. Character deepens through adversity. Identity solidifies when it is questioned. Without challenge, development remains shallow. With challenge, development becomes transformative. Philosophers have long observed that human beings do not truly know what they believe until they must defend it, not with arguments, but with choices. It is easy to affirm values when they cost nothing. It is harder when those values require sacrifice. Harder still when they result in misunderstanding, criticism, or loss. Yet those moments clarify the soul. They strip away pretense and reveal authenticity. So when we talk about greater challenges ahead for Christians, we are not speaking from fear. We are speaking from understanding. Spiritual growth and spiritual resistance are inseparable. When faith matures, it attracts opposition. Not because it is weak, but because it is impactful. Some believers may feel increasing social pressure. Perhaps they will be viewed as outdated, naive, or intolerant simply for holding to biblical convictions. Others may experience relational tension as friends, family members, or co-workers struggle to understand their renewed commitment to faith. Still others may face internal battles, doubt, discouragement, or spiritual fatigue, as they try to live out what they believe. But here is the profound truth. These challenges are not signs that something is going wrong. They may be evidence that something is going right. Sociologically, pressure strengthens group identity. Communities that face difficulty together become more unified, more supportive, more intentional. Spiritually, pressure purifies motivation. It reveals whether our faith is rooted in convenience or conviction. And psychologically, adversity cultivates resilience, the ability to remain steady under stress. Christians throughout history have demonstrated this pattern. When the church experienced comfort, it often grew complacent. When it experienced challenge, it grew courageous. Not because believers sought suffering, but because they discovered strength they never knew they possessed. We may see the same dynamic emerge in this season. The distractions that once diluted commitment may lose their appeal. The fear that once silenced believers may lose its power. Instead of retreating, many Christians will find themselves stepping forward with renewed boldness, not aggressive but confident, not defensive but steadfast. This strength will not always look dramatic. It may appear as quiet perseverance, as daily faithfulness, as refusing to compromise when compromise seems easier, as continuing to love when love is not reciprocated, as choosing integrity when no one is watching. And the remarkable thing is this: those who once believed themselves weak may become the strongest. The person who doubts their ability to stand may discover endurance they never imagined. The believer who feels unnoticed may become a source of encouragement for many. Strength often develops silently beneath the surface until the moment it is needed. So instead of fearing the challenges ahead, perhaps we should reinterpret them. What if they are not barriers but catalysts? What if they are the very means through which God equips His people for greater influence, deeper faith, and wider impact? Because in the end, the Christian story has never been defined by ease. It has been defined by endurance. Challenges may increase, but strength will rise to meet them. As we reflect on the possibility of increased challenges and rising internal and external pressures, there is a natural progression we cannot overlook. Times of testing often strip away what is unnecessary, and in doing so, they reveal what truly matters. After November 27, 2025, many Christians may find themselves confronted with a profound shift in priorities. The pursuits that once consumed their energy, status, comfort, entertainment, accumulation, may suddenly feel shallow in comparison to the deeper calling stirring within them. Psychologists refer to this as value realignment, a phenomenon where major life transitions or societal disruptions force individuals to reconsider what they are living for. It is as if the mind conducts an internal audit, asking, does this still matter? Does this still satisfy? Is this worth my time, my energy, my life? Philosophers have long argued that human beings are teleological creatures. We are purpose-driven by design. When our lives lack direction, we inevitably experience emptiness. We can distract ourselves for a while, but eventually the soul demands meaning. And spiritually, God often uses seasons of shaking to redirect His people toward mission. Not punishment, but realignment. Not loss, but refinement. Many believers may begin to notice a growing dissatisfaction with superficial living. Activities that once seemed enjoyable might feel hollow. Conversations that once entertained might feel trivial. Success without significance will no longer feel like success at all. This isn't depression or discouragement, it is awakening. It is the realization that life is too short and too precious to waste on what does not endure. Throughout history, the church has been most effective when it has been most focused. When believers understood that their calling was not merely to exist but to influence, not merely to survive but to serve, not merely to believe privately but to live purposefully. We may see this same phenomenon emerging again. Instead of asking, how comfortable can I make my life? Christians may begin asking, how impactful can my life become? Instead of prioritizing personal convenience, they may prioritize spiritual contribution. That shift can transform families, communities, and entire nations. Purpose has a way of creating clarity. It simplifies decisions. When you know what you are called to do, distractions lose power, drama loses its appeal, comparison loses its grip. Suddenly the noise of the world no longer pulls you in the same way because you are anchored in something deeper. And mission doesn't always mean something dramatic or public. It can be as simple as choosing to love consistently, to encourage faithfully, to serve quietly, to speak truth graciously. Purpose expresses itself in daily choices, choices that accumulate into a life that matters. Some believers may discover new callings, mentoring others, teaching, giving, creating, leading, supporting. Others may rediscover passions they abandoned long ago. The spark that once burned brightly but faded under routine may reignite. What felt dormant may awaken. And here is the remarkable part: purpose produces strength. When you know why you are standing, you stand longer. When you know who you are serving, you endure more. When you know what you are living for, fear loses influence. This renewed sense of mission will not only impact individuals, it will strengthen the church. Communities built around shared purpose become resilient, unified, and effective. They stop arguing about minor differences and start working toward meaningful goals. They stop competing and start collaborating. So perhaps the question we should be asking is not, what will happen around us, but what will God accomplish through us? Because when believers regain a sense of mission, the world around them changes. Not always immediately, but inevitably. Purpose gives direction. Mission gives momentum. And this season may become the catalyst that turns passive believers into purposeful disciples. The world may shift, but those who live with purpose will shape what comes next. As we think about this renewed sense of purpose developing in the hearts of believers, there is a natural outcome that follows. Purpose rarely thrives in isolation. When people rediscover mission, when faith becomes active rather than passive, they instinctively begin seeking others who share that same heartbeat. After November 27, 2025, many Christians may realize something profound: they were never designed to walk this journey alone. Modern culture has trained us to value independence above all else. We celebrate self-sufficiency, personal achievement, individual expression. Yet psychologists consistently remind us that human beings are fundamentally relational. We are wired for connection. Studies show that resilience increases dramatically when individuals feel supported, understood, and linked to a community that shares their values. Philosophers throughout history have echoed this truth in different forms. Aristotle called humans social beings, insisting that a person isolated from community is either a beast or a god, someone outside the normal human condition. Spiritually, Scripture reinforces this reality again and again. We are one body, many members. We bear one another's burdens. We encourage one another, strengthen one another, sharpen one another. And when seasons of uncertainty or transition arise, the need for authentic connection becomes unmistakable. Challenges can feel overwhelming when faced alone, but when shared with others, they become manageable. Fear loses intensity when spoken aloud. Hope multiplies when experienced collectively. Many believers may begin noticing a pull toward deeper relationships. Casual friendships may evolve into meaningful spiritual partnerships. Small groups may become lifelines. Prayer gatherings may feel less like optional events and more like essential support. Instead of scattering, Christians may find themselves drawing closer, leaning on one another, learning from one another, lifting one another up. This shift is not merely emotional, it is transformational. Sociologists refer to this as collective identity formation, where individuals adopt stronger convictions and healthier behaviors when connected to a supportive group. Community reinforces values. It strengthens habits. It sustains commitment. Think about how embers behave in a fire. One ember removed from the flame cools and eventually dies out. But embers kept together ignite one another, maintaining heat and intensity. Faith works the same way. Isolation weakens. Community strengthens. Some believers may realize that the loneliness they've been feeling wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. They were disconnected from the very relationships that would have fueled their growth. Others may discover that the encouragement they've been waiting to receive is actually the encouragement they were meant to give. Community is not just about support, it's about contribution. When believers gather, each person brings something unique: wisdom, experience, compassion, prayer, service. Everyone has a role, everyone has value. And this rising emphasis on community may reshape the way the church functions. Instead of being defined primarily by buildings, programs, or events, the church may become defined by relationships, by people caring for one another in practical ways, by believers opening their homes, sharing meals, praying together, serving together. What once felt like obligation may begin to feel like family. And here's the beautiful truth. Unity does not require uniformity. Community is not formed by everyone thinking the same way, but by everyone moving in the same direction. Shared purpose becomes the bond that overcomes differences. When believers focus on mission, minor disputes lose their power. Competition fades, criticism softens, cooperation grows. This kind of unity is not accidental, it is intentional. It requires humility, patience, and vulnerability. It requires willingness to invest time and effort. But the reward is immeasurable, because when believers stand together, they stand stronger. When they support one another, they endure longer. When they love one another, they reveal Christ more clearly to the world around them. So perhaps the question is not, who will support me? But who can I strengthen? Who can I encourage? Who can I stand beside? Because the community we long for is often the community we help build. The world may isolate, but believers united will overcome. As we consider the strengthening of community and the deepening of relationships among believers, there is one more dimension that ties all of this together. A foundation that undergirds every other development. Because even with renewed purpose, even with supportive community, even with spiritual hunger and visible faith, there will still be uncertainty in the world. There will still be unanswered questions, unpredictable circumstances, and moments that test the heart. And it is in those moments that Christians will discover the most defining characteristic of this season, an unshakable hope rooted not in circumstances but in the promises of God. Hope is a fascinating concept. Psychologists describe it as a future-oriented mindset that enables a person to persevere through difficulty. It is not naive optimism. It is the ability to envision a meaningful outcome despite present obstacles. Philosophers have long argued that hope is one of the essential forces that sustains human existence, the very thing that prevents despair from taking over. Without hope, the mind collapses inward. With hope, the soul expands. But the hope we are speaking about here is not simply emotional resilience or positive thinking. It is a hope grounded in something transcendent, something unchanging. The world's version of hope says things might get better. Biblical hope says, God is faithful, therefore I can stand. Those are two very different realities. After November 27, 2025, many believers may recognize that their confidence can no longer rest on institutions, systems, leaders, or predictions. Those things shift, they disappoint, they fail. And when they do, people who relied on them collapse internally. But those whose hope is rooted in the character of God will find themselves steady when others are shaken. This shift can be transformative. Instead of asking, what will happen next, believers will begin declaring, no matter what happens next, God is still who He has always been. That kind of certainty produces peace that defies explanation. Psychologically, hope rewires the brain. Studies show that individuals who maintain hope experience lower levels of stress, greater emotional stability, and stronger problem-solving abilities. Spiritually, hope anchors the soul. It prevents drift. It keeps the heart steady when fear tries to pull it away. And here is where this becomes incredibly powerful. Hope is contagious. When people see someone remain calm in chaos, confident in uncertainty, joyful in difficulty, they cannot help but wonder where that strength comes from. It becomes a testimony without words, a quiet declaration that faith is not theoretical, it is transformative. This hope does not deny reality. It acknowledges difficulty, but refuses to be defined by it. It recognizes challenges, but refuses to surrender to them. It faces uncertainty but stands firm because it trusts the one who sees beyond it. Many believers may find themselves growing in this kind of hope, not because life becomes easier, but because they begin experiencing God more personally. Promises they once heard become promises they live. Truths they once recited become truths they rely on. The faith that once felt distant becomes intimate, sustaining, and real. Hope becomes the lens through which they interpret the world. Instead of reacting with fear, they respond with faith. Instead of withdrawing, they engage. Instead of despairing, they encourage. And this hope will not only sustain individual believers, it will strengthen the entire community. When one person stands firm, others draw strength from that stability. When one voice speaks hope, others find courage to believe. Hope multiplies, it spreads, it transforms environments. So the question becomes, what will define us in the days ahead? Fear or hope? Uncertainty or trust? Collapse or confidence? The world may tremble, systems may fail, predictions may prove false, but God's character will remain the same. His promises will stand. His faithfulness will not falter. And those who anchor their lives to Him will not be moved. The future may be uncertain, but our hope does not have to be.